Hello friends, welcome back to Case Studies with the BizDoc. And this week it's another suggestion from you. It's American Apparel. Actually, it's not American Apparel per se. I'm using American Apparel to talk about the balanced skills of leadership and how that's critical in a CEO, especially if that CEO happens to be you and you're trying to build your own company. Being self-aware about the skills you do and don't have is very important. And I'm going to talk about how somebody that wasn't as self-aware as he could be, or had an ego that just prevented him from, understanding and making necessary changes and bringing things in until it was way too late, almost killed the company, and then did kill the company. And the backdrop for our lesson is American Apparel. So point number one, a one-dimensional CEO is not unusual, but a one-dimensional CEO has to know their limitations. Steve Jobs knew he needed someone like Tim Cook. Andy Grove of Intel, you go back and look at the history of him. He knew he needed Steve Barrett. Bill Gates did very well with Steve Ballmer. So we see partnerships that happen where you go, man, this is like yin and yang. Well, it all starts with the CEO who's self-aware enough to get that person in the room, or can set their ego aside and let their board talk to them to bring that skill into the room. And sometimes it's just business partners talking to you saying, hey, you know this, but you're also going to need this, and you having the sense to listen. So point one, any CEO that has one strong dimension has to know their limitations. Point two, if that CEO is a product and marketing savant, you better find an awesome finance and operations driver that has some personality and a stout personality. And what I mean by that is a lot of finance people are head down in the numbers, very good people. I've not met in my life a lot of finance people that also have operational acumen and some bloody knuckles that shows that they know how to fight it out and push hard to get what they want. You don't need a coy or a shy CFO in those cases. If that one-dimensional CEO is a marketing and sales savant, then you better have a strong personality covering finance and operations. That was not the case at American Apparel, and we're going to go take a look at it. So let's go do a brief walk through the history, and then let's take a look at where the bumps in the road happened. First of all, American Apparel was founded way back 1989 by a Canadian guy named Dov Charney. Charney was in Canada, and I got this little meandering line here, and for about 8 years doing this and that, but he was actually importing cool t-shirts from America, selling them in Canada. He had bragged at one point that he had imported 10,000 t-shirts over a 2 or 3 year period. But in other words, he was an entrepreneur at heart, wanting to start something, and had a nose for fashion, a real marketer's attitude, and a kind of an edgy persona bringing it together. Notice I didn't mention financial acumen, operational dynamics, none of that. Well, guess what? Over the course of his career, Charney would never be accused of being a financial guy or an operations guy, and ultimately that would bring down American Apparel. Along with his own ethical lapses and a lot of other things that you can read about on the internet that I won't go into, there was that whole side of it. But ultimately, a one-dimensional CEO that didn't have a lot of finance and operations expertise ultimately cratered American Apparel and got sued for sexual harassment like 1,000,000 times along the way. So there you have it, 1989 making t-shirts, moves to LA to a small shop under the 10 freeway. And if you know, that's a freeway, runs across LA, it's famous for a lot of traffic, basically runs from downtown to famous Santa Monica. He's there 3 years later, and a bunch of debt later, they get a 7-story, 800,000 square foot building. Well, there's a lot of people that were making, independent artisans that make furniture and fashion in LA. Independent artisans, again, pretty much a staple in LA. But there he is trying to make a tier 1 mega factory, cranking out clothing, and that's where it started, 800,000 square foot. Well, he was a branding machine. He got involved in gay rights in LA. He got involved in immigration issues. He was part of a coterie of businesses that every year on May 1st would have these marches for rights and things like that in LA. He coined the phrase legalize LA and had his own ID up on a billboard, hey, legalize immigration, let people come in. So he was very, very out there, and that played really well with this market. So he had a nose for that those issues were key to his young, youthful market that was eating up this very edgy, interesting advertising and buying the clothes that were represented in it. In 2003, they decided to fully vertically integrate.
Tom's word of the day.
Now here's what that means. You can be a manufacturer, you can have a brand you market, or you can distribute. If you look at things like, let's take a look, Best Buy. They're electronics distributor, retailer. That's what they do. They don't make TVs. They leave that to Sony. Sony makes TVs and puts their own brand on it. Well, so vertical integration is where you do all of it. And I think the greatest vertical integration success story is Apple. Apple has this unbelievable brand in marketing, and they make their own products with features that are phenomenal, that stood in any sort of brand and marketing. They'd still be great products, but with the Apple brand and marketing, it's magic. And then they have their own stores where they've created this aesthetic that when you and I go in there to buy it, it all comes together. So Apple is one of the very, very, very few you'll find out that's all vertical integration. The brand, the marketing, the product, the distribution, the sales, end to end. Well, American Apparel decided they were going to do that and open their own stores. So they're going to have their own stores, their own stuff, their own marketing, their own manufacturing. You know, that's kind of risky because in fashion, a lot of things are made in places like Vietnam or Honduras or China, and that's where you get low cost so that you can sell those to stores like a Dillard's or a Macy's or a Harrods in London. And Harrods wants to make a bit of a profit, so you have to sell at a wholesale price. It gives you a profit. Harrods, the retailer, Macy's, they want a little bit of a profit, but it's tough to be all three. But nonetheless, American Apparel steps into that good night, and that's what they did in 2003. They opened their first store in Echo Park, which is in the shadow of Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. Well, a couple years later, they're building up even more debt, and they want to take this further. They actually want to go on the stock market. Well, everything that they had done up to this point had been a little different, and on the outside, it looked successful and exciting and things, but cracks in the foundation. And in 2006, they went on the stock market, and this is how they did it. It's a little bit different way, but there's these things called SPACs, and I'm going to do a class on finance and show you the different ways you can go public. But a SPAC is like a special purpose acquisition company, also called a blank check company, and it's created to take something public. So it goes on the stock market as basically a shell with money looking around. And this particular company called Endeavor, bought American Apparel and then changed the name to American Apparel. So now, in effect, American Apparel is on the stock market, but they never had to go through a full IPO. That would prove to be deadly. So here they are on the stock market. They go out, it's like $10 a share, and it goes out. They reach a peak of 15, and I think it was late 2007, and then this thing crashed. By the end of 2008, it was all the way down, 8 and 9. It was heading down under 5. Even as 2008 was a record year, and they got this award, Retailer of the Year. Well, while all that was going on, they received an award, Retailer of the Year, and 2008 would be the last penny of profit the company would ever make. Their last penny of profit ever. I mean, there's only one word for that. Damn! You have such success, you have all these things going, and you can't find a way to make a profit in the face of all this with all these great customers and people buying it and buzz and bands like Van Halen, you know, putting American Apparel on and being on stage with it, you know, and a lot of these were without being paid. They just sort of thought the brand was really cool. With all that, you can't make a profit. Really? Really? Well, we're going to see why. They're growing like mad, and by the end of 2009, they had 281 stores around the world. That's incredible. That's almost worth another dam, but I won't go there. You have all these stores, and there's, you know, they've had their last profit, and then something big happened. I'm going to turn this way and talk about this side because this is really the bad news side. So there's the story of growth, a bunch of marketing and product and advertising and edgy brand and positioning coming up to 2009, their auditor quits. Now, when you're on the stock market, once a year you have to have an audit. And that audit is an independent auditor that looks at all your financial books and your operations, and they publish an audit letter that tells people, like you and me, the public who could be buying stocks, going public on the stock market, that everything's cool, and they've got an audit letter that says, yeah, we've looked over everything, here's the notes, and this company is conforming to financial law. Okay, well, Deloitte, the auditor, quits. After the first auditor, Markham, was actually fired. So Markham gets fired in 2009. Deloitte gets hired in 2009. Deloitte finishes going into 10, the 2009 audit, and then Deloitte quits. They resign, which is very unusual. And they said, there is certain information that's come to light that makes us believe that the 2009 audit we did has got problems and may not even be correct because we didn't even see some of this stuff. And here in 2010, we have just lost confidence and we cannot put our reputation on the line to be an auditor. We're out of here. Now, for those of you watching from around the world, Deloitte is one of the top auditors in the United States. That is like having one of the finest experts say, I can't work with this guy, which is exactly what they said. So there you go. So now the board finally steps in and they get a new CFO, Chief Financial Officer. He's hired. He worked at Old Navy and Wet Seal, two very prominent, well-known brands, which is good experience to have. Sounds like an adult being brought in the room, but it's coming in 2011. Man, a lot of things have happened. Those 5 years from 2006 to 2011, the stock's trading under $5 a share is basically like flatlining, like an EKG, beep, 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 beep. It's just flatlining there. And it had tons and tons and tons of debt. And by the way, at the time they went public, a very interesting thing, Endeavor so eager to take American Apparel to the stock market that they actually assumed, in other words, they took over $110 million, I think was the number, in debt. So there had been a history here of Charney creating a lot of debt and then getting bailed out. Well, he gets bailed out there. And in 2009, when all this auditing was going on, Charney goes out and gets an $80 million loan from a company called Lion Capital at 15% interest. Now, let me tell you, for those of you at home tuning in, 15% is a horrible interest rate if you're a company. $80 million loan at 15% interest rate, you know what that is a year? $12 million in interest a year. $1 million a month in interest he's paying on that money. So that's bad money. And you know why he got it from Lion Capital? Because with all this stuff going on, he probably can't go to Goldman Sachs or any of the big banks and get a regular rate. He's got to go to somebody that says, all right, we're going to do this, but it's going to cost you. And that's exactly what happened. So Lion Capital is just like, hey, there's risk here. Well, in exchange for the risk, we need to charge them a higher interest rate. What if some of this crap that's going on keeps going on? But they're flying, they're selling stuff, they got all these stores, let's take a shot. So that's kind of the way it works. You can look at Lion Capital and say, well, they're a shark. And you also can look at them and say, well, no, they're protecting their butt. They're protecting their source of money. So here they are in there, and they had this really good year in 2008, and they're moving a lot of merchandise, and they decide, you know what, we need to build our own distribution center. So here we go again, back to let's own everything. There are distributors in apparel that could distribute for you. There's contract manufacturers could have manufactured for you. There are all these things that other fashion brands do. Instead, American Apparel was, we will build and own everything, and it was death. So they go to build this distribution center outside of Los Angeles, and they figure, oh, it'll take about $5 million, and the new CFO that had come over there, he kind of was supposedly in charge of it, but it's hard to believe that because Charney was in charge of everything. And nonetheless, they go out to do that, and it costs 3 times what they thought it was going to cost. Things I've read said they thought it was going to cost anywhere from $4 to $6 million, end up costing almost $15 million. which is just astonishing. And it was a disaster. It didn't work when it got there. Apparently Charney claims that he went out and like built a little place for himself in the distribution center and was there 24/7 for months trying to get the thing running. Who knows if that's folklore or that's true, but what is true is a bunch of money went out the door. So, but the brand was still out there with momentum. And so even with the stock here in 2013, they had their biggest sales year of all time. Biggest sales year of all time. They did $634 million, which was like up 2-3% from the previous year. The same store sales where you measure last year, this year, they were up about 3%, but they had lost $106 million that year. And you're just like, wait, how do you lose $106 million on all-time sales? Well, you have a distribution center that didn't work. You've got operations that didn't work. So finally in 2014, with all of this going on and a lot of other things that were sort of moral failures, and I'll let you go read about Dov Charney's fallacionic hijinks, because this guy did a lot of things, including something during an interview with a female reporter that is just over the top. Well, the board had that as well as this history here, and in June 18th, he comes into the boardroom and he's got sneakers. Now we're going to have American Apparel sneakers, and they're like, set those aside. We have a letter for you. You're fired. And he flips out. He sues the company. He goes through all these things. But they came down to this. And here's a very interesting statement that tells you what I talked about in the very beginning about needing to have financial and operations with him. Charney never hired or retained the kind of management bench strength that a company of its size needed. Those problems were on him, his responsibility. He never put that team around him. And when we finally got the CFO from, Wet Seal and things here, it was just way too late. So you take a look at things, and there's a bunch of skills that are here. Awesome branding and marketing, check. Awesome products that were designed well, check. Retailing, you better have financial and operations cost. You've got mall leases, you've got store leases, you've got build outs. There's a lot of cost in there that you need to be watching. But the finance and ops were missing. Then there's manufacturing. You're operating a manufacturing company in Los Angeles paying $12 an hour, it was reported, when other people in town were paying minimum wage $5.50. How do you make a t-shirt at twice the dollars per hour that the other guy is doing, or 4 times the cost for someone doing it offshore? Look, there's a little thing that I built here, a very simple little chart for you. The pluses and minuses. Made in the USA. That was a bold, bold move to do it. And the nice thing about that is it does give you speed. They claim they could make prototypes of new garments and interesting things and get it going really, really fast. But the downside was it was a higher cost. Now the brand, it was premium. It was in the middle, but it was like the high end of the middle. So it was like premium middle class. And it's a premium brand and it's edgy, which justifies paying a little bit more for it. That's the bet. The higher cost of labor and being able to charge a little bit more for a brand that's kind of edgy and hip that people want and well-designed and good material and a good cut and feel to it, that's great. There's the bet. But your edgy marketing is also a fad risk over time. Do kids move on to something else? Does your customers move on to something else? Then you have your social ethics. That was very noble. It was a very noble thing to do. But once you say, I'm all about American labor, I'm onshore, I'm doing this, this, and this, now you can't offshore. The minute you offshore, you violate everything you're talking about. So it was a very delicate thing here, and then Charney needed to have, from day one, a strong partner the way those other legendary CEOs did, so he could have been guided through this, because I think that what they stood for and what they did, the brand and the marketing, was phenomenal. And Charney was a branding genius. He earned that Retailer of the Year. He just wasn't going to get CEO of the Year from Wall Street. As a matter of fact, it was quite the opposite. People that audit Wall Street, they quit. They fired the client. So when you take a look at it, as you build your company, here's something to really understand. Be aware of who you are Ask people who you are. There's things like Clifton Strengths Finders. There's a number of things that you could look at. But number one, be passionate about your product. Be passionate about the marketing. But balance that with people around you that are going to tell you the truth about who you are so that you can bring people in there that balance you from day one. This guy, it looks like a success story, but now he's famous for no finance and operations expertise, presiding over a crashing brand, and along the way, all those personal moral decisions he made was just, there needed to be someone around him that says, what are you doing? Go play and do all that at home. Go, live your personal life, but don't bring all that into the office and what things you're doing here. He was rumored to have walked naked through the factory in his underwear, or partially naked with his underwear, and one time walked through the factory apparently wearing a sock over Mr. Johnson. Good grief, how can you lead as a CEO, with that going on? There are other things to worry about, such as you're on the public or on the stock market, your auditor's firing you in this. So we can see there's a lot of ego that was in the middle of it. So check your ego at the door. Get great people around you, because a one-dimensional CEO has got to know their limitations, number one. And number two, if you are a marketing and branding and product savant, you better have a finance and operations person with a strong personality so that you can balance each other and drive to success. And that, my friends, is this week's case study under the umbrella of American Apparel. Now, I need a pillow. Is this pillow made in America? I don't know where this pillow is made, but it's my favorite pillow here, and it's the one I love to use. So thank you for watching this week, and please subscribe to Valuetainment, the best channel on the internet for entrepreneurial content, including case studies from yours truly. Until next time, I'm Tom Ellsworth, and I hope I left you better than I found you.